are listed here. For example, we use all the biological survey for the high troph level species. And then we use satellite data as well as ECOMON project for the low troph level species. And fishery data were then obtained from different management agencies. So there were 4 types of stressors that we mainly focus on. One is the warming temperature, and one is the fishery extraction. And then there were also changes in primary production and the zooplankton community diversity. We want to consider this together using this diagram here. So we think this stressor will all influence the ecosystem dynamics through the ecosystem interconnection. So using those methods there, we evaluate how these different types of drivers influence the overall species richness through the ecosystem interaction. So we found that there were a lot of complex connection within Hudson River Estuary New York Bight ecosystem, both within and between seasons. Especially, we found that there was seasonal connection between Hudson River Estuary ecosystem indicator and the New York Bight ecosystem indicator. We found that the spring Hudson River Estuary seems to be strongly connected to the fall New York Bight, which we think might be attributed to the spawning activity of species. So they migrate from this to habitat, which lead to this seasonal connection. And then, based on our regime shift analysis, we found that for those climatic and environmental indicators, they are always, the regime shift of those indicators are always ahead of those ecological indicators, whereas the fishery indicators usually lag behind those in the ecosystem indicators, which lead us to have this hypothesis that environmental changes are more dominant compared to fishery stressor. We also evaluate the temporal and spatial responses of different ecosystem indicators, and we found something interesting. So lots of researchers found that temperature is kind of the key stressor that regulating the northeast continental shelf. So we also examined the trend of the community temperature index, which is an index that can represent for the overall community temperature preference. And what we found is that the increase in species richness in the New York Bight does not always coincide with the trend of the trend of community temperature index, which means that the expansion or the increase of warm adapted species might not be the only reason that lead to this species richness increase. And we also found some difference response between different tropical levels and both over time and close space. Especially we found different response between the warm and the cold adapted species. In addition to those evaluations, we found that we need to also look into the species level dynamics, because now we found that increasing temperature is not the only reason that lead to the increased richness. So we conduct the species level dynamics by examining their changes in their biomass and also changes in their distribution range. And what we found is that the seasonal movement or the expansion, both the expansion of warm water species and the seasonal movement of the species migration lead to the seasonal difference of the ecosystem. So it's important to consider species level dynamics when you are evaluating the overall ecosystem dynamics. And this part of analysis has been recently published in the Ecological indicator, and you are welcome to scan the code there to read the full text, and you are welcome to ask any question if you have any. So now let's shift our gear to the model development part. As I mentioned before, the end-to-end model need to include both low troph level component and high troph level component. For the low troph level component, we will use the model listed here, which they compile the physical and biogeochemical model together to simulate the dynamics of low troph level species such as small and large zooplankton, phytoplankton, etc. And we will couple our osmos model to this model so that we can simulate the whole ecosystem from plankton to high troph level species. Now let's look at the species that get the tickets to our model. So when we are developing an ecosystem model, how do we determine the key species that we want to include it in the model? First, we want to know those that have higher ecological importance, which means that they should have relatively dominant biomass. And second, we want to think about what kind of answer do we want to, what kind of question do we want to answer. So based on our pre-analysis, apparently we found that there was two things that we care about. First, we know that this ecosystem is strongly influenced by climate change, especially global warming. And then second, we know that there is connection between the Hudson River Estuary and the New York Bight, and this kind of connection is across season. So we want to understand these connections, and we want to have these in our model so that we can understand these ecosystem dynamics better. So with that, when we are choosing key species, we will consider several things. First is their biomass dominance, and second is that for those species that using both habitats, we will give them they will have like higher chance to get into this model. So the species with figure here, for example, black sea bass, striped bass, scaup, etc., they will be modeled as separate species in the model. But like the species in the table there, such as the longfin squid, salmon flounder, little skate, etc., they will be modeled as functional groups. So now we have all the species, and then we start the model parameterization. So there was a lot of parameters that are needed for this type of model development. Here is just an inexhaustive list. So for the initial, some of the parameters are very straightforward. For example, the initial population size, the growth and land speed parameter, we just get it from the website or literature, and then we format them into the parameter files. And other parameters, we set the spatial resolution as 0.05 degree because Hudson River is kind of a relatively narrow compared to other states, so we need a relatively fine spatial scale. And then for other parameters such as species and nature mortality, we got those information from stock assessment reports. As mentioned before, there was seasonal movements for the species, so we need to develop the movement maps for those key species and define their movement within the model. And so we develop these seasonal maps for those species and format them into grid map, which define the region that species can move around, and also the step that they can move around at each time step. The difficult part of this parameterization process is modeling the predation process, because I probably didn't mention this, but like the key assumption of osmos is that it's size-based opportunistic predation, which means that predation will only happen when the predator and the prey occurs in the same location, and the size ratio between the predator and the prey met the requirement, meaning that the predator needs to be bigger than the prey enough to let the predation happen. So what we need to determine is the size ratio between predator and the prey, and also the accessibility of the prey to predator. So for predation size ratio, we determine the parameter based on the diet composition dataset from our website. And then for the accessibility, it's mainly, we already have the distribution map, but we also need to count into the depth difference of different species. So the accessibility parameter is mainly determined by the depth difference of their habitats. So for our next step, we are going to couple this model to the aforementioned physical, biological, chemical model, and then we will calibrate the two model and use the model in different scenarios. For example, climate change and aforementioned the connection of the two habitats, etc. And we are planning to have a workshop in early 2026, which you are all welcome to attend. And I remember I have a QR code on the right, upright for our project website, and I don't know where it is now. But if you want to go to our project website, please contact me and I will give you the website. The website is still under development. It's not that fancy yet, because I'm not a web design expert yet. But yeah, if you're interested in this this project and you want to know more about our workshop, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Oh,
Questions?
sorry.